June 8, 1914. Possibly the most important day in history. While touring the streets of Sarajevo, Serbia, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austro-Hungary was mortally wounded with his wife at his side. The assassination resulted in a harsh ultimatum from the Austro-Hungarian government. This ultimatum would eventually lead to a falling out among the great powers, World War I, and, due to a domino effect, World War II. However, the Austro-Hungarian government was unjust in their declaration of war, because the Serbian government had completed all but one of the demands of the Austro-Hungarian government. The demand they did not complete was negligible, and, technically, it didn't exist in the first place, and many Serbian officials were just using this assassination as an excuse to go to war. Austria-Hungary's ultimatum opens as follows. Opening, quote, Serbia recognizes that the fait accompli regarding Bosnia has not affected her rights, and consequently she will conform to the decisions that the powers may take in conformity with Article 25 of the Treaty of Berlin. In deference to the advice of the great powers, Serbia undertakes to renounce from now onwards the attitude of protest and opposition which she has adopted with regard to the annexation since last autumn. The movement, which had its birth under the eye of the Serbian government, has gone so far as to make itself manifest on both sides of the frontier in the shape of acts of terrorism and a series of outrages and murder. The Royal Serbian government shall therefore undertake to suppress any publication which incites to hatred and contempt of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. End quote. While the Austro-Hungarians' many demands were harsh, the Serbians responded generously, complying with almost every demand completely. Quote, Serbia will introduce a provision into the press law providing for the most severe punishment of incitement to hatred and contempt of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. End quote. The only argument the Serbians had with the treaty was the accusation that their government was involved. Quote, Serbia cannot be held responsible for the manifestations of a private character, such as articles in the press and the peaceable work of societies. End quote. However, the Austro-Hungarian government was not satisfied with the reply. They sent their formal declaration of war on the 28th of July, 1914. Opening, quote, the Royal Serbian government, not having answered in a satisfactory manner on the note of July 23, 1914, presented by the Austro-Hungarian minister at Belgrade, the imperial and royal government are themselves compelled to see the safeguarding of their rights and interests, with this object to have recourse to force of arms. End quote. Austro-Hungary declared war, even though the Serbians responded with grace and met their demands, showing the ultimatum was designed to be refused. When the Serbians met all the demands in the treaty, except taking all the blame, the Austro-Hungarians called that one demand, which, again, was not technically even a demand, as it was only a sentence in the preamble, a reason to go to war. To compound upon this unjust declaration of war, the Austro-Hungarian officials had an obvious lust for war even before the assassination. This desire is recorded in the official minutes of the meeting following the assassination of the Archduke. Quote, the joint war minister is of the opinion that a diplomatic success would be of no value. Such a success would only be interpreted as a weakness. From the military point of view, he must emphasize the fact that it would be better to wage war now rather than later. And there were definitely more people among the Austro-Hungarian High Command that wanted war with Serbia. For example, the Austro-Hungarian Chief of Staff and Commander-in-Chief during the July crisis was Konrad von Hotzendorf. Michael Duffy writes, quote, in 1911, Conrad's demand for war with Italy during the Italo-Turkish War resulted in his dismissal, although he was recalled in December of the following year, and was again in readiness to demand war against Serbia at the height of the July crisis in 1914. End quote. This man is only one of the examples of men who desired to go to war without warning. He, along with others, such as Leopold von Berchtold, the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister, would get their wish very soon. Some people may say that the Austro-Hungarians were just in their declaration of war because the terrorists had ties to the government. This and other reasons for the ultimatum are expressed in this explanatory letter addressed to the other great European powers after the ultimatum. Quote, Serbia embarked on a policy of instilling revolutionary ideas into the Serb subjects of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, and so preparing for the separation of the Austro-Hungarian territory on the Serbian frontier. Serbia became the center of a criminal agitation. These societies and groups count among their members generals and diplomats, government officials and judges. In short, men at the top of official and unofficial society in the kingdom. End quote. However, in their response to the ultimatum, Serbia acknowledges this and attempts to make amends. Quote, Serbia also agrees to remove from military service all such persons as the judicial inquiry may have proved to be guilty of acts directed against the integrity of the territory of Austro-Hungary. And they expect Austria to communicate the names and acts of these officers for the purpose of the proceedings which are to be taken against them. End quote. Serbia recognized that this accusation was made by the Austro-Hungarian government was plausible, so they took steps to prevent retribution. By answering the demand as well as they did, taking seats of power away from officials suspected of being tied to terrorist organizations, they took away the argument that this was a government-sponsored act. Because Serbia complied with all of the demands of the Austro-Hungarians, and the Austro-Hungarian officials were ready to go to war anyway, the Austro-Hungarians were unjust in their declaration of war. What started out as a simple international visit by a prominent figure became 2 bullets and 2 deaths later, a situation which would hurl the world into Armageddon. As surprising as it may seem, that such a small disagreement over such a small clause could throw the major world powers into total warfare. Once a nation, man, a cause is set on a purpose, it is extremely difficult to change their